Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. One of the most important moments in the Skywalker saga is the birth of the Skywalker Twins and their exile to different corners of the galaxy. Something that happens hastily in the last moments of the Revenge of the Sith. But have you ever taken a second and thought about this whole situation and thought about why the Jedi did this, right? Why did they take responsibility over these two children and then decide to exile them in the way they did? Because after you think about it a little bit, it's actually kind of screwed up. You know, Anakin Skywalker's fall to the dark side was quite unique. Most Force users are driven to the dark side because of their desire of power. And there's something intoxicating about submerging yourself in the Force and using it to violently change the world around you. But Anakin's pathway to the dark side was quite different. You see, he was born as the chosen one. He was naturally gifted with an immense amount of midichlorians, and because of this, Anakin was never really obsessed with power, and that's because he had no shortage of it. As a matter of fact, all throughout his childhood, one of the biggest problems he had was containing his power, and that kind of made him an outcast amongst his fellow Jedi Padawans, and a lot of the older members of the Jedi Council kind of feared him because of this excessive power he had. What Anakin desired more than anything was just family. You know, he loved his mother, and even though he was taken away from her at a very young age, I think his mom still had a huge impact on who he was as a person. You know, Anakin Skywalker is actually a pretty compassionate person. If you take a look at how he treats the clones beneath his command, or how he takes care of Ahsoka or Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I think that nurturing aspect, that nurturing side of him comes from his mother. And even more importantly, I think like when you're a kid, knowing your mom is around creates a sense of stability and calmness. It's like a safe place you can always return to. Even though Anakin and Shmi are separated at the age of like 9 or 10, I think knowing that her mom is alive keeps Anakin relatively stable somehow. And so when Shmi Skywalker was slaughtered by the Tusken Raiders, it completely breaks Anakin. I mean, he was traumatized by witnessing her die, and then he was unable to properly deal with all the emotions he was feeling, and so he ends up massacring an entire village of Tusken Raiders. But even as the dust is settling from that event, the real problem emerges. Anakin feels alone. When you have a mother, even one that you never see, you can still be a child in her eyes. There's this idea that if things go terribly wrong in your life, you can always go back home and moms will take care of you. You know, as unrealistic as that is what having a mom feels like. And this was something Anakin believed deep down in his psyche, and now that's gone, and so it changes him. The Jedi Order was not a warm place for an unorthodox and powerful individual like himself. His Jedi Masters were cautious around him and whispered about his power behind his back. And even Obi-Wan Kenobi, his close friend and mentor, wasn't exactly a parental figure. What Anakin was looking for was unconditional love, and he couldn't find it in the Jedi. Born to a single mother as a slave, Anakin's had a very insecure childhood and life, and so stability is important for him. And when he loses his mom, one of the foundations in his life, he starts looking for another thing to anchor everything down, and that would be a family. Anakin believed that by starting a family, he no longer had to be by himself. He craved the stability that he believed a family could give him. He craved that sense of belonging. The only problem, of course, is that goes against the Jedi's teachings. They don't want people forming attachments. They don't want people falling in love and having children. Or at least the Jedi during this period of time didn't want that. And to make matters even worse, Anakin didn't fall in love with just anyone. He falls in love with Padme Amidala, the very powerful, influential senator from Naboo. When he begins to have Force visions of his wife dying for some unknown ailment, Anakin desperately tries to figure out how to save her. He's unable to talk to the Jedi or his master because his relationship is so secret, and this is how he ends up getting closer to Palpatine and falling for the dark side. This is really the sad thing about the Jedi. They should have known that Anakin was going to be different. This is why they hesitated to accept him in the first place. He has all that baggage, and so when they accepted him, they probably should have kind of changed the other rules as well for him, you know, kept an open door policy for this young troubled kid who always seemed kind of lonely. That way, instead of going to Palpatine for advice about his dying wife, maybe he could have went to Obi-Wan Kenobi or Yoda, and they could have given him some better advice than they actually end up giving him. And so it was love, not necessarily obsession, that made Anakin go to the dark side. Maybe that's why he gets his redemption at the end, because he didn't go willingly because of power. He went because he had no other choice, or he believed he had no other choice. The funny thing is, Anakin was always very vigilant about fighting against the dark side. But if there was one thing that could make him turn his back on everything, it was Padme. Not only was his wife in danger, she was pregnant, and so that made the situation even more urgent. Now, ultimately, Anakin is consumed by the dark side. He even strikes out against his wife, choking her with the Force when she comes to see him on Mustafar. It's a low point in Anakin's life that is followed by his defeat at the hands of his former mentor, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Anakin by this point had lost everything. Everything he feared would happen happened anyway. His family would be shattered. When Anakin awakens on the operating table as Vader, he's notified by Palpatine that his wife had died by his own hands. He had been blinded by his anger and struck out against her, apparently. The guilt Anakin was feeling for choking his wife probably only reinforced this idea that he was the one who killed his wife, even though that's not true. This also echoes the warnings that the Jedi gave him about pursuing his Force visions, something about self-fulfilling prophecies. So what actually does happen? Well, Obi-Wan Kenobi ends up taking Padme Amidala to a secret medical facility on Palas Masa shortly after the events on Mustafar. It was there we find out that Padme not only had a baby, but she had twins. We're not really sure if Padme knew about this, but we're pretty sure she didn't tell Anakin anything about the twins. As a matter of fact, I don't think anyone knows about the twins aside from Obi-Wan and maybe those droids who delivered the babies and whoever they told. The Jedi decided that the best course of action would be to hide the presence of these babies completely. And so after Padme passes, the mortician is instructed to make Padme still appear pregnant. And so on Naboo, there's actually a hologram layered over her stomach to give her that baby bump. The Jedi wanted to convince any of the Empire spies that might be watching that Padme never managed to give birth before passing. And with Padme not giving any instructions to the Jedi about what to do with these kids, well, things become even more complicated. The Jedi, or what was left of them, was in no state to shelter any children. If anything, having Luke and Leia be in their presence was super dangerous. The entire Empire was after them. And so they have to come up with a plan. It involves giving the boy twin to what remained of the Skywalker family on Tatooine. Obi-Wan Kenobi would go into exile and watch over the Skywalker family as well. And the girl is taken by one of the Jedi's allies, Bail Organa, a senator and viceroy on Alderaan, head of a very powerful noble family. The funny thing is, at no point do the Jedi discuss the possibility of returning these children to their sole living parent, Anakin. And this has to do a lot with how the Jedi viewed the Sith as completely evil and inhumane animals. The Jedi would have returned the children of separatist fighters they found. They would have returned the children of bandits that they found back to the bandits. But they find a Sith offspring. Nope. We're going to take it, control it, and try to manipulate that kid to help us destroy the Sith. That's how the Jedi think. And this is why the Jedi have always been wrong in their conflict against the Sith. They're generally very moral individuals. They have their Jedi code that they follow. They have these very lofty aspirations about who they want to be as guardians of the galaxy. But the second they run into a Sith, they throw away all of their compassion, all of their balance, and attack their hated dark side enemies like rabid animals. The Jedi aren't this balancing force they see themselves as, but just another extreme group at the other end of the spectrum. Imagine if you were responsible for 2 babies, and you weren't, an extreme Jedi. You were just like a normal person, and you wanted these kids to have a good life. What would you do with them? Well, first, I wouldn't separate the twins. Life is hard enough without parents, let alone being separated from your other half. Remember, no one knew that Padme had twins. No one knows that these babies are Anakin and Padme's. Very few people knew they were pregnant, and almost no one knew that they were twins. If Anakin and the Empire were somehow looking for his children because he suspected that Padme had given birth to them, they would actually be looking for just 1 kid and not 2. Because remember, not only is the Empire hunting the Jedi, but so are the Inquisitors, who are really interested in finding Force-sensitive children. The Jedi, just by being present in these kids' lives, is putting them in danger. Take a look at Kenobi's exile on Tatooine. He spent the first few years just learning how to let things go as thugs and tyrants abused the locals. Kenobi had to fight his instinct to intervene the entire time. Kenobi ultimately does a good job at keeping his cover from being blown, but there are many close calls where Luke almost gets hurt as a result. On top of that, we find out that Anakin Skywalker, aka Darth Vader, the Emperor's enforcer, is obsessed with finding Kenobi, which of course puts young Luke in danger as well. And also, what about the off chance that Anakin wants to return to his ancestral home and just poke around? What if he just runs into Luke by accident there? And he's like, oh, you feel like my son through the Force. Which brings me to the point that the Jedi weren't trying to do what's best for Luke and Leia. What they were actually trying to do is raise and store Luke and Leia somewhere safe so that perhaps in the future they could use these kids against the Sith. You see, it was never really about the kids. It was just the Jedi being the Jedi, being obsessed with their war against the Sith and destroying their enemies in any way possible. You know, this is really the problem with the Jedi. They don't see individuals. They always see the greater good. You know, it's like working for the CIA. You always have to be careful. Like, are they actually doing this for the right reasons, or are they trying to pull off some crazy plan against the dark side? And the same thing goes with Leia being placed in Bail Organa's hands. Him and his wife were interested in adopting a daughter, and despite being really well-intentioned, he was actually selected because he was a trusted ally to the Jedi and would remain in contact with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda throughout the entire Imperial reign. And guess what happens? You know, later on, the Inquisitorius would use Bail Organa's known connection with Jedi fugitive Obi-Wan Kenobi, and that would place Princess Leia in danger, for no other reason than because of her family's connection to the Jedi. You know, even with the Jedi Order falling apart around them, you'd think Yoda and Obi-Wan would pause for a second and be like, hey, maybe we should do things differently. Maybe we shouldn't follow the Jedi Code anymore because it got us into this problem in the first place. But no, they do exactly what they would have done if they were still in power. They use these kids, they exploit these kids for their war against the Sith. That's why they keep these kids close to them, even though it endangers their lives. That's why they keep these twins cruelly separated, so that if one is discovered, the other one can still live on. The Jedi completely have robbed these children of any life that they could have and decided that they need to fight this war. And to make matters even worse, you know, once they've hidden these kids away, the Jedi don't really come up with a plan to use them at all, right? There's no follow-through at all. And while things are pretty awesome for Leia, who gets to be a princess in one of the most powerful, richest families in the galaxy, Luke grows up as a moisture farmer in the middle of nowhere in terrible poverty. I mean, why couldn't he go to Alderaan and live with the, Organas? They had enough room in that fucking palace they were staying in. Turns out not only is life on Tatooine incredibly boring and meaningless, it's also super dangerous, with Tusken Raiders and Krayt Dragons roaming around the desert killing everything, and Jabba's thugs running collection rackets in town. Ultimately, it was good that Obi-Wan Kenobi was nearby, because Luke almost died a few times from just regular Tatooine nonsense. And so yeah, to summarize, the Jedi decide what happens to these kids, even though they have no real right to do so. And when they make that decision, they don't even put them in a very safe situation. In a selfish desire to maintain some control over them, they put the twins' lives in danger, mostly because the Empire is also hunting the Jedi. It's the Skywalker twins' connection to the Jedi that endangers them the most. Both Reva and Maul almost find out about Luke because of Obi-Wan Kenobi, not because they somehow found out that Padme Anakin's children was alive. That never even came up once. And the Organa family, along with the entire planet of Alderaan, also weren't safe places for children, because the Alderaanians were stockpiling weapons and harboring so-called Terries. And then you have the complete lack of contingency in case these kids are somehow found. I mean, even the rule of two Sith had a grander plan they were following. Luke and Leia had to wing the entire rebellion, and Kenobi and Yoda were never even around long enough to give any good advice to Luke or Leia. If anything, Luke ignores most of the stuff that the Jedi Masters teach them, and for good reason. And that is how we start the rise of the Empire. The Jedi have still not learned from their arrogance. They don't see that their tendency to meddle with things that do not concern them is a bad thing. The Jedi, once again, can't do basic things like put the needs of children in front of their own more selfish galactic battle between the light and dark side. Over the course of history, you really gotta ask yourself, how many people have died because of this crazy struggle? But stupid or not, hiding away the Skywalker twins has a profound consequence for the history of the Empire, as these two babies will one day rise as major leaders in the political and military wings of the rebellion. So there you have it, guys. That is the real reason why the Jedi hid away the Skywalker twins. They clearly were not thinking about the well-being of these children when they did this, in my opinion. They were, again, thinking about this, cosmic battle between the light and dark side, which, again, is why the Jedi and the Sith were just more a part of the problem than any kind of solution. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.